imagine you are like a hardened SWAT commander, right? And
Yeah,
you are literally kicking down the heavy wooden doors of a legendary serial killer's fortress to catch them completely red-handed.
right.
But now, imagine you are also an ordained Catholic bishop and a secret radical Protestant.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and a guy who spends his evenings writing passionate poetry in ancient Greek. Oh, and you also happen to effectively control this massive, world-spanning corporate monopoly.
I mean, it sounds like five totally different lives crammed into, like, a poorly written screenplay.
Yeah.
It really shouldn't be possible for one human being to embody all of those things simultaneously.
Right. But today we are taking a deep dive into a man who actually lived that exact, completely paradoxical life.
It's wild.
It is. We are looking at Juraj Thurzo. So he was born in 1567, died in 1616. He was a Slovak nobleman, the Palatine of the kingdom, and officially the very first Slovak Lutheran.
Yeah, and if you go to Slovakia today, you can actually see exactly how his legacy is remembered. It was
Uh-huh.
back in 2016, they minted a 10-euro commemorative coin for him.
Oh,
Yeah, and on one side, you have this highly detailed portrait. He's got this incredibly prominent, distinguished beard. He's wearing a thick, aristocratic hat and a heavy, fur-lined cloak. I mean, he looks like a man who gives orders and expects them to be followed immediately.
I can picture it, but there's a flip side, right?
Exactly. You flip that same coin over, and the imagery completely shifts.
Mm.
On the reverse side, he is depicted as a full-blown knight on horseback. His cape is flowing in the wind, he's heavily armed, and right behind him is this massive, imposing stone castle perched precariously on a jagged cliff.
Wow.
It is a deeply medieval, almost mythic depiction of a warrior.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the heroic knight on the coin doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of what we're actually dealing with here.
Not at all.
This is a man who defies every single neat historical category we try to put him in. He is just a walking contradiction. He's a ruthless military commander who fought in the mud and blood against the Ottoman Empire, but he was also a tender family man who playfully demanded his wife pay him, like, kiss debts through the mail.
Yeah, the letters are amazing.
They really are. And he was the supreme judge who brought down Elizabeth Bathory, who is, one of history's most infamous, nightmarish figures.
And for you, listening right now, trying to make sense of a modern world that feels entirely polarized, a world where we are constantly told you have to pick a side, you have to fit into a specific ideological box. Well, Thurzo is the ultimate case study in breaking the box.
Absolutely.
He shows us the sheer mechanical reality of how a person navigates extreme contradictions. Just think about the cognitive dissonance you would feel if you had to wield absolute political power within a system that you fundamentally, philosophically disagreed with.
All while trying to protect your own deeply held personal convictions.
Mhm,
It's like
right.
it's a high wire act over a flaming pit.
That's a great way to put it.
But you don't step out onto a high wire like that unless you have a massive safety net. And for Juraj Thurzo, that safety net was forged out of sheer generational, unfathomable wealth.
Money.
Right. Before we can even talk about the warlord or the politician, we have to talk about the money. Juraj came from the noble family of Betlenovce. But they weren't old blood, right? They weren't ancient royalty who had ruled since the dawn of time.
No, no. They basically bought their way into the aristocracy.
Which is fascinating.
We absolutely did. And they did it through what was essentially the tech boom of the Renaissance, which was mining.
Okay, mining.
Yeah, Juraj's ancestor, a man named Jan Thurzo, made a business move that genuinely altered the course of European history. He partnered with the Fugger family of Augsburg.
The Fuggers.
Right. And to understand the scale here, the Fuggers were the mega-billionaires of the 15th and 16th centuries. They practically invented modern international banking.
Wow.
So by allying with them, the Thurzos created a colossal copper monopoly.
I really want to dig into the mechanics of that, because when we say copper monopoly today, it sounds like, I don't know, owning a bunch of pipe factories.
Right.
But in the Renaissance, copper was everything, right? It was like the lithium of the 1500s.
That is the perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Copper was the foundational resource of the era's military-industrial complex.
Because of the weapons.
Exactly. If you wanted to cast bronze cannons, which literally every monarch in Europe desperately needed to fight their wars, you needed massive amounts of copper.
Makes sense.
You also needed it for church bells, you needed it for roofing the grand cathedrals, and crucially, you needed it for minting currency.
Oh, wow. So they controlled the money supply, too.
Basically, yeah, the Thurzo Fugger Company operated on a logistical scale that is just hard to wrap your head around. They integrated the entire supply chain.
From the ground up.
Exactly. They controlled the deep shaft mines in modern-day Slovakia, they built massive smelting complexes, and they controlled the trade routes that shipped this copper all the way to the ports of Venice and Antwerp.
That is insane.
They were pulling money out of the ground and selling it to every king and emperor on the continent.
So we are talking about a level of wealth that fundamentally alters the rules of reality for the people who hold it. And we can literally see the physical manifestation of that money. Like Juraj's father, Franciszek Thurzo, he used that copper fortune to become the most powerful feudal lord in northwestern Slovakia.
He went on a massive building spree.
Right. He rebuilt Orava, Litava, and Baita castles. And these aren't just big houses. I mean, Orava Castle, for example, is this breathtaking, terrifying fortress that looks like it was carved directly out of a vertical rock spire.
It's incredible to see.
It looms over the river valley. It is designed to project absolute untouchable power.
It's architectural intimidation is what it is.
Yeah.
Franciszek used his wealth to build villages, sponsor education, and establish farms. But this is where the historical mechanics get really fascinating.
Oh, where the contradictions begin, right?
Yes, because Franciszek was deeply entrenched in the Catholic establishment. He was a royal advisor. He was the prefect of the royal chamber. He was even the Catholic bishop of Nitra.
Okay.
But just despite holding a Catholic bishopric, he openly favored the Protestant Reformation.
Which just breaks my brain a little bit. You are a Catholic bishop, enforcing Catholic law, collecting Catholic tithes, but you're secretly cheering for Martin Luther.
Yeah, it's a huge paradox.
And it gets even wilder with his son, our guy Juraj. So Juraj gets sent to Italy. He is educated at Padua University, which is the absolute epicenter of Renaissance humanism and science at the time.
I mean, Galileo taught there.
Exactly. So he gets this elite education, comes back, and thanks to his uncle Alexij pulling some serious bureaucratic strings, Juraj is handed his father's old job.
Just handed to him.
Yep. Juraj Thurzo becomes the Catholic Bishop of Nitra.
He inherits the title, the estates, the income, and the immense political leverage that comes with a bishopric. But here's the critical twist.
Okay.
Juraj was raised Protestant. He wasn't just casually sympathetic like his father. Juraj was an incredibly devout, unyielding Lutheran.
Right.
He was so fiercely committed to the evangelical faith that he legally stipulated in his will that if any of his children ever abandoned Lutheran teachings, they would be completely, entirely disinherited.
Cut off from the copper money.
Cut off from the money, the castles, everything.
Okay, stop right there. I need to understand how this actually works in practice. How does a man hold a Catholic bishop's throne, complete with the fancy hat and the direct line to the Pope's representatives, but then legally threaten to ruin his own children if they aren't hardcore Protestants?
It's quite the setup.
It feels like a modern corporate executive working as a senior VP for a massive tech giant, collecting a massive salary, while actively and openly using all that money to build their direct competitor.
That's pretty much exactly what it was.
But how did the Catholic emperor in Vienna not just execute him for heresy?
Because the emperor literally couldn't afford to.
Oh.
This is where we have to look at the cold, hard reality of fluid identity and class privilege in the 16th century. For a commoner, religious dogma was rigid.
Right, they'd be burned at the stake.
Exactly. If a peasant proclaimed the wrong faith, they died. But for the ultra-wealthy, for a family that controls the copper supply and the most strategic fortresses in the region, wealth acts as an insulator against dogma.
So the money bought him a pass.
The Thurzo-Fugger money effectively purchased a shield. The emperor in Vienna was fighting a massive existential war against the Ottoman Empire. He desperately needed Thurzo's money, Thurzo's troops, and Thurzo's castles to protect the eastern flank of the Holy Roman Empire.
So it's basically the emperor saying, I know you're a heretic, Juraj, but you're my heavily armed, incredibly wealthy heretic, and the Turks are at the gates, so I'm going to look the other way.
Precisely. It is the ultimate rules for thee but not for me scenario, but weaponized for his own survival.
Wow.
Thurzo appeased the Catholic establishment publicly by maintaining loyalty to Vienna, fighting their wars, and holding their titles, while quietly enforcing and protecting Lutheranism in his own territories.
Still, you have to think about the psychological toll that takes. Think about the cognitive dissonance he must have been wrestling with every single day.
Oh, definitely.
Here's a man who truly, deeply believes in the Protestant vision of salvation. He believes his immortal soul depends on it. Yet every morning he wakes up, puts on the armor of a Catholic empire, and goes to work playing 3D political chess to survive.
Yeah.
He is balancing the spiritual demands of his faith against the physical reality that if he slips up, the emperor could strip his family of everything.
It requires an unbelievable level of compartmentalization.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just passive political maneuvering either.
Right, he was fighting.
He was actively leading troops into battle. He fought tenaciously in all the major anti-Turk campaigns.
Against the Ottomans.
Exactly. And sometimes he was even ordered to suppress fellow Protestants who had rebelled against the emperor.
Wait, really? He fought his own people?
He had to. He had to do it to maintain the political capital required to protect his own family. That is a heavy, heavy psychological burden for anyone to carry.
And what's amazing is that this tension, this constant balancing of brutal public duty and deep personal loyalty, it wasn't just something he did at the office.
No, it bled entirely into his personal life.
Which brings us to a part of the story I find genuinely moving, the romantic warlord. Because you look at the portrait of this severe, bearded military commander, and you don't expect him to be this incredibly tender, passionate family man.
But he was. And it was forged through significant tragedy, actually.
Right.
Juraj was a warlord by trade, spending months at a time in military encampments, and his personal life was hit by early, devastating loss. His first wife, a woman named Hiofia, died at the tragically young age of 22.
God, 22.
This was in 1590. She died during the birth of their daughter, Judita. They also had a son, František, who died very young.
That's awful.
So Juraj is left as a young widower, surrounded by war, raising 2 young daughters, Judita and Zuzana, who would actually go on to outlive 4 husbands.
That is a staggering amount of grief to process while you are actively commanding armies.
It really is.
But the story shifts in 1592 when he marries for the second time. He marries Baroness Elżbieta Koborova. Now, we have to address the 16th century reality here. She was 14 years old at the time. Right. Which is obviously deeply jarring to us today, but was entirely standard for high-level aristocratic dynastic alliances back then.
Yeah, that was just how it worked.
And the plot thickens because Elżbieta was from a very prominent, very devout Catholic family.
Yes, the Kobor family was closely linked to a revered Catholic site, the statue of the 7 Sorrows of Mary in Szasztin.
So another contradiction.
Exactly. Once again, we see Juraj, the staunch, secret Protestant, binding himself to a deeply Catholic family. It reinforces the idea that at the highest levels of a nobility, preserving wealth, territory, and political alliances often completely superseded theological differences.
But it wasn't just a cold, calculated political merger, was it?
No, not at all.
This is where the historical record gets wonderfully human. Juraj and Elżbieta actually loved each other deeply. They had 9 children who survived to adulthood, 5 daughters, and 1 son named Imrich.
And we know about their connection because they wrote to each other constantly.
Letters.
Over the course of their marriage, they exchanged around 600 letters. And these are not just dry administrative updates about crop yields or estate management. They are incredibly passionate.
The language he uses is striking. Remember, this is a man writing from the front lines, often covered in the grime of anti-Ottoman warfare.
Yeah.
And in one of the letters, he writes to her, "Although love is the honey of life, which fills the cup with a sweet taste of oblivion, I feel obliged to sacrifice my strength for a sick homeland."
It's beautiful.
The honey of life, a sweet taste of oblivion. That is just gorgeous writing. It completely shatters the stereotype of the unfeeling medieval brute.
Absolutely.
You have this polyglot, he actually wrote poetry in Greek, by the way, who is violently torn between the warmth of his family and the sheer bloody duty he owes to his country. He is trying to explain to his wife, and probably to himself, why he has to keep riding out into the violence instead of staying home.
It exposes a deep vulnerability. He views domestic peace as a kind of beautiful oblivion, a place where he can forget the horrors of the long Turkish war. But his sense of duty pulls him back.
Yeah.
And yet, the letters aren't all heavy, tragic longing. There is a playful, flirtatious dynamic between them that is incredibly revealing.
Yes. My absolute favorite detail in the entire historical record of this man is the kiss debt.
It's so good.
He wrote to Elżbieta, playfully instituting a rule. He said he would respect her wishes, but he demanded that every single time she failed to reply to one of his letters, she would be mathematically in debt to him, and the penalty had to be paid in kisses.
The exact phrasing in his letter is wonderful. He writes, "It only depends on your honor. whether you will accept the punishment, that as many times as one of us does not answer a letter, so many times he will owe him kisses.
It is so incredibly human. You just don't expect a 16th century Supreme Judge in Palatine to be flirting via the medieval postal service about kiss debts.
It really bridges the centuries.
It does. You realize these were just people, deeply in love, trying to maintain a connection across a war zone. And his devotion to his family wasn't just ink on paper. He literally carved his love into stone.
The palace.
Yeah, in 1601, he commissioned the construction of the wedding palace in his capital of Vitycha.
And the wedding palace is a masterpiece of Renaissance architecture. It stands out even among the grand castles of the region. It's a wide, beautifully proportioned building with an incredibly ornate, highly decorated facade.
And it was built for one specific purpose.
Right, he built an entire massive palace strictly to throw weddings for his daughters.
I mean, how unusual is that, even for a billionaire?
Oh, it was exceptionally rare.
Yeah.
And an absolutely massive statement of intent. He even placed a grand inscription right above the main portal.
What did it say?
Well, it listed all of his intimidating titles: Lord of Betlenovce, head of Orava County, administrator of royal estates, advisor to the emperor. But then it concludes by stating he ordered the construction of this palace out of fatherly love for his dear daughters.
It has to be the ultimate girl-dad flex in European history.
It really is.
But knowing Juraj, it couldn't have just been about sentimentality, right? There had to be a mechanical political reason to build a dedicated wedding venue.
Exactly. We have to view this through the lens of Renaissance power dynamics. Yes, it was a genuine expression of a father's affection, but politically, it was a monumental, literal stone-and-mortar advertisement of the Thurzo dynasty's wealth and influence.
Right, because of the alliances?
Yeah, he had 5 daughters. In the 17th century, daughters were the key to forging dynastic alliances. You are negotiating marriages with other powerful noble families across Central Europe.
So you bring them to the palace.
Precisely. By inviting these rival lords to your custom-built spectacular Renaissance palace, you are showing your future sons-in-law precisely what kind of empire they are marrying into. You are intimidating them with luxury.
Wow.
It was a diplomatic tool designed to secure the best possible alliances for his family's survival.
It's brilliant. He's taking his personal love for his daughters and weaponizing it to build a political firewall around his family.
Exactly.
And that specific ability to balance deep personal loyalty with cold, strategic, long-term maneuvering is exactly what propelled Juraj to the absolute pinnacle of power in the kingdom. Which brings us to the moment where he steps out of his local domain and onto the national stage.
Yes, because despite the emperor's uncompromising Catholic stance, Juraj had made himself utterly indispensable.
With his armies and money.
Right, his military competence against the Turks, his vast financial resources, and his diplomatic cunning had earned him incredible favor in Vienna. And this culminated on a very specific date, November 17, 1609.
That was the day the monarch convened an assembly in Bratislava to elect a new Palatine, and they chose Juraj.
Did.
I want to make sure we don't just gloss over that title. Palatine sounds like a fancy ceremonial role, but what did it actually mean mechanically?
In the Kingdom of Hungary, which was part of the broader Habsburg monarchy, the Palatine was the second highest position in the land, directly under the king.
Number 2.
Yeah. You can think of it as combining the roles of modern prime minister, commander-in-chief of the military, and chief justice of the Supreme Court, all vested in a single individual.
That is an insane amount of power.
It was. When the king was absent, the Palatine ruled in his stead, and Juraj achieved this while already being the hereditary head of Orava County, a position he had held since 1585.
Yeah.
He was now, without question, the most powerful man in the kingdom next to the monarch.
So he takes this immense, almost dictatorial power, and what does he do with it? He turns his family estate in Vitycha into the de facto capital of the kingdom.
And he doesn't just make it a grim military headquarters either.
No. He transforms Vitycha into a vibrant, thriving cultural epicenter.
He essentially built an oasis of the Renaissance amidst the chaos of the 17th century. He poured his wealth into hosting theater performances, staging grand concerts, and facilitating deep theological and philosophical debates.
It must have been amazing.
He built a massive, comprehensive library. He was bringing intellectuals, artists, and theologians from all over Europe to his court.
Imagine the atmosphere. You have the long Turkish War tearing the continent apart. You have religious factions burning each other at the stake across Europe. And yet right there in Vitycha, you have this multilingual intellectual safe haven.
Yeah, it was his sanctuary.
It must have felt like a different planet. But Juraj didn't just throw concerts. The most impactful thing he did from Batub was what he did for the local people. He was a nobleman of Slovak descent, and he used his position as Palatine to actively legally champion a distinct Slovak identity.
This is where Juraj moves from being a successful politician to being an architect of a nation.
Right.
In the early 1600s, the concept of a nation, as we understand it, didn't really exist. People identified with their religion, their local lord, or their town. But Thurzo actually introduced the specific phrase Slovak nationality into official parliamentary documents. Yes, he repeatedly used the term our Slovak nationality in his own official correspondence. He was deliberately fostering a shared ethnic and cultural consciousness.
And he backed up those words with hard legal mandates. He didn't just write nice letters about it. He actively defended Slovaks in national disputes against other powerful ethnic groups in towns like Krupina and Banska Bystrica.
He did.
And this is the part that I find genuinely shocking for the time period. He enforced a law that literally bore his name, the Nationalist Transactus Thurzoniana.
Quite a mouthful.
Yeah, but this law forced local governments to share power.
It is an incredibly modern concept applied in a deeply feudal society. The law explicitly required that the three main ethnic groups in these towns, the Germans, the Slovaks, and the Hungarians, must have equal representation in municipal governments.
Equal representation in the 1600s.
Exactly. But it went even further. Thurzo mandated that the role of the mayor and even the parish administrator had to rotate systematically among the nationalities.
Explain to me how radical that was. Because today, we see complex power-sharing agreements in heavily divided democracies, like in Lebanon or Northern Ireland, and we consider that to be the absolute cutting edge of modern diplomacy.
Right. It takes months of negotiation.
It takes teams of international lawyers, and Thurzo just instituted it by decree in 1614.
It was radically progressive. You have to remember that cities in this era were often dominated by the German patrician class, who controlled the guilds and the wealth. Thurzo looked at a multi-ethnic society that was constantly prone to friction and violence, and he instituted a strict legal framework for forced equity.
Wow.
He recognized that without structural, legally enforced representation, the dominant groups would always crush the minority.
And the local people completely understood what he was doing for them. We actually have a quote from 1614 that proves it.
Oh, the priest in Krupina.
Yes. A local Slovak priest in the town of Krupina, a guy named Kaban, explicitly invoked Thurzo's law to demand his rights. He wrote, "We, the Slovaks of Krupina, demand that in the election of a pastor, the same principles be observed as in the election of a mayor. Now it is the turn of the priest of Slovak nationality."
That quote is vital because it shows the law wasn't just a piece of paper in Paideia. The common people understood their legal rights under Thurzo's protection and were using his legal framework to claim their space in society.
It was working.
It was. And Thurzo elevated the status of the people by elevating their language. As Palatine, he could have conducted all his daily official business in Latin, which was the language of the church and diplomacy, or Hungarian.
He didn't.
No, he routinely conducted his agenda in Slovak. By doing so, he legitimized the language at the absolute highest levels of the state apparatus.
He was building a nation through bureaucracy, but he was also a master diplomat on the international stage. You can't build a nation if it gets invaded. He kept the peace with the Turks as best he could, but he also had to play peacekeeper with his own volatile allies.